How wide is God's mercy? Everyone who teaches will be familiar with the way Jesus answers the question put by the expert in the law. What must I do to inherit eternal life? Jesus replied with another question. He said, "What is written in the law?" After all, this man was an expert in the law, a learned man, experienced in his field, so he must have some idea of the answer to his own question. Indeed, he did. He's able to quote the law faultlessly. Luke tells us that the lawyer was asking this question as a trap, one of many asked of Jesus, specifically designed to catch him out, to test his authority, to expose him as a fraud. The excited crowds were eager to hear Jesus' words. But Jesus was a Jewish rabbi in his own right. He had every word of Scripture written in his heart, and no human being could ever win one over him, whether or not they believe him to be the Son of God. The law as given to Moses is quite clear. We can find it in Deuteronomy 6, verse 5. All Jews know it by heart. Many of us do too. Chapter 6, verse 4 to 9. Hear, O Israel, the Lord your God, your Lord our God, the Lord is one. Love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your strength. These commandments that I give you today are to be upon your hearts. Impress them on your children. Talk about them when you sit at home and when you walk along the road, when you lie down and when you get up. Tie them as symbols on your hands and bind them on your foreheads. Write them on the doorframes of your houses and on your gates. And again in Leviticus chapter 19 verse 1 begins, the Lord said to Moses, speak to the entire assembly of Israel and say to them, be holy because I, the Lord your God, am holy. And there follow many laws which are to be observed, including those which specifically relate to neighbours. Do not, verse 13, do not defraud your neighbour or rob him. 15 and 16, do not pervert justice, do not show partiality to the poor or favouritism to the great, but judge your neighbour fairly. Do not go about spreading slander among your people. Do not do anything that endangers your neighbour's life. I am the Lord. Verse 17, do not hate your brother in your heart. Rebuke your neighbour frankly so that you will not share his guilt. Do not seek revenge, verse 18, or bear a grudge against one of your people, but love your neighbour as yourself. I am the Lord. There it is in verse 18. Love your neighbour as yourself. Written in the word of the Lord to Moses in front of the whole of the nation of Israel. I am the Lord. And it is very straightforward. Jesus said, do this and you will live. Here in plain sight, in the law learned by all Jewish children as they grew up, is the answer to this question. Could it really be limited to just the person who lives next door? Or maybe just extend to those who live in their close community? Is that what Jesus meant? So what really prompted the lawyer's next question? The test question. It comes, who is my neighbour? The lawyer won't let it rest, you see. Not satisfied, he pushes Jesus further. Using his skills as a lawyer, he is persistent in looking for a way to trick Jesus into some blasphemy. Why? Why did he ask this particular question? As we have heard, the Jewish law was not silent on the treatment of neighbours, but it doesn't seem to give a word neighbour a definition. Today's Oxford English Dictionary puts it like this: neighbour equals a person living next door to or very near to another. Even today, the word does not expand the meaning as Jesus would like it to be expanded. It isn't enough. Maybe there was a genuine confusion about the concept of neighbour amongst the Jewish nation. But whatever the truth about that, it was indeed the perfect question to ask Jesus, because it gave him the perfect opportunity to tell this wonderful, well-known story. We all now know what is coming. And we have seen this morning how good our recall is. How often did you have to look at the screen? But the story is only part of the whole. It is not just a story about a traveller set upon by thieves. It is about our human response to events which we encounter every day. It is about love, compassion, mercy, simple care for those in trouble. And it is about straightforward thoughtfulness to see the world from someone else's point of view, an ability to put the needs of others above our own. How good are we at that? How far will we go to help someone else? But there's so much which can get in the way. Our routine, perhaps, or our lack of time. We are just too busy. An urgent appointment, a train or a bus that cannot be missed, or the general pressure of life as we live it, or perhaps worst of all, a disinterest in the needs of the world around us. It's only too easy to look straight ahead, quickly justify our decision to look away and hurry on. Although he doesn't say it, we can see that Jesus was pointing out that the laws which the priests followed concerning purity got in the way of them showing compassion. For in this story, the law itself was not being fulfilled fully. It was contrary to itself. The priests could not deal with the unclean and at the same time remained within the laws of purity. But had they attended to the man who appeared to be dead, they would have discovered that he was actually alive, although his life was in the balance. Even so, to approach such a man would have been to render themselves unclean, and that would have meant a whole rigmarole of purification. A waste of time, much better to hurry on. There was just no room in life for an unknown traveller who was probably dead anyway. The letter of the law must always be upheld. But Jesus had asked the lawyer, "How do you interpret the law concerning neighbours?" Love your neighbour as yourself. The priest and the Levite didn't seem to interpret God's law as Jesus intended. They seem to have had no inclination to show any compassion. In their sight, this man was not worthy to receive anything at all. There were no grey areas in the law. They were unable to bend it even a little, and they had no concept of this man being a neighbour. He could justly be ignored. It would have been too costly for them to stoop down to offer help in both their personal and priestly roles. A couple of weeks ago, Graham and I were walking towards Brighton station to catch a train. Perfect timing. There outside on the pavement was someone asking for money. Not busking, no dog, just, it seemed, needing money. I spent a very short while justifying why I couldn't stop and show Jesus love or compassion. We have become conditioned to avoid giving money to those who might take it to buy drugs rather than food. There was no time to go to the mobile shop, which was just 2 steps away, to buy him an orange juice or a banana, which, according to a street pastor whom I know, is the best kind of help to give. Instead, I admit I looked away and hurried on to catch the all-important train. Easy? I offered a prayer for him, but was this what James was speaking of in his letter? Faith without good deeds? I just hadn't come prepared for the right kind of help in my bag. I was conscious of the person I was with and the need to catch that train. I had to let it go. By the way, I understand now that the banana must be semi-peeled if you do give one away, because if you don't, it can be sold on to someone else, and hey-ho, you've got your money. So that's another contribution, to understand the situation and to react in a sensible, reliable way. The understanding of this story and all Jesus' parables is, on the face of it, easy. But then comes the hard part. And there is always a hard part to Jesus' stories. That is to obey Jesus and go and do likewise. Because Jesus used the familiar for the backgrounds to his stories, it was easy to connect and see them in the mind's eye. Fig trees, talents, farmers, sheep and goats, vine growers, lost wedding coins, seeds, and now here, that road connecting the Jews to the Samaritans. All the people who were listening to Jesus that day would be familiar with this dangerous road between the two towns. Jericho was an abundant oasis and one of the places designated for priests and Levites to live whenever they were due to serve in the temple. Possibly for about 12,000 priests and Levites at one time, who would regularly be going up and down that road to Jerusalem. They would have been a familiar sight. But this road also was regularly used by thieves and murderers for their ill-gotten gains. Plenty of hiding places in the rocks. Plenty of places to ambush. 17 miles descending 3,000 feet from Jerusalem to Jericho, a little further than from here to Brighton. Steep, rugged, twisted. The perfect place to lie in wait for unsuspecting, unprotected travellers. No one would want to linger along that path. The perfect place for Jesus to set the scene. The man has no identity. He could have been anybody going about any kind of business or pleasure. Jesus doesn't say, if you are a man, it could have been you. If you are a woman, it could have been your husband or any other of your male relatives. Whoever it was, he became a person in deepest need. Where were you when I needed a neighbour? Was I on the other side of the road? Or was I bringing compassion, water, bandages, my mobile phone, just in case? So what of the Samaritan? There had been conflict between the Jews and the Samaritans for many hundreds of years. In Luke chapter 9, verses 51 to 56, we can read how James and John reacted to the opposition that Jesus met when he was in Samaria. Jesus was on his way to Jerusalem. The Samaritans didn't want him there. James and John, the sons of thunder, let their feelings be known. You might like to look that one up. Luke 9, 51 to 56. Now in his story, Jesus makes a Samaritan the one who shows mercy to the stranger. It must have galled his Jewish listeners, especially any priests or Levites who were listening, and it heightened the drama, the tale of the tale. There must have been ripples running through the crowd. It would certainly have been quite shocking to suppose that a Samaritan could be regarded as a better person than a Jew, let alone a priest or a Levite. But Jesus makes it clear that makes clear the irrelevance of whom the victim is and the irrelevance of whom it is who offers compassion. The need of any person must be the concern of every person, no matter what their creed or identity may be. How wide is God's mercy? Were you there when I needed a neighbour? Amen.